Yesterday's tariff-infused Liberation Day has come and gone, but many say a new trade war has just begun. After President Trump signed an executive order establishing tariffs on over 180 countries, some of the intended targets like China and the EU have already expressed their intention to retaliate. What could this retaliation look like? How could it affect the American consumer? And will these tariffs have the desired effect that President Trump is looking for? Here to discuss this is Spencer Morrison, editor-in-chief of the National Economics Editorial and author of Reshore, How Tariffs Will Bring Our Jobs Home and Revive the American Dream, which released back in February of this year. Spencer, welcome to Washington Watch. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me on the show today, Tony. It's a pleasure to be here.
So let's start with this, Spencer. Let's look at the actual tariffs themselves. What are they and how do they work?
The tariff, very simply, is a tax on imports that are coming into the United States. So what President Trump has done with his Liberation Day tariff push is he's taken the sort of average tariff rate in each country and then cut it in half. And then he says, look, that's what we're going to charge if you want to bring your products into America. So he described them as sort of kind tariffs. They're not entirely reciprocal. If they were reciprocal, they'd be double what they currently are. But the reason he's done this, I believe, is to promote, it's like an olive branch. What he'd like to do is promote fair and free trade with these other countries. So he says, look, you've got a couple of months to get your act together. You can either lower the tariffs so we can have fair trade. If you don't, we're going to raise them, and you're going to suffer the consequences of not playing ball.
So how did we get to this place, Spencer, where we had, all of these countries that had tariffs on American goods, and we were just kind of humming along here, paying, making it inequitable for us to do business?
Yeah, it's really an unbelievable story. So for the last 50 years, America's politicians have been asleep at the wheel. We embraced this international free trade, air quotes, free trade, starting in 1974. And ever since then, this country has run a large, chronic trade deficit. The cumulative value of this trade deficit since 1974, it's $25 trillion. That's almost a whole year of economic production in this nation. That's money that has been spent abroad on consumable goods. And in exchange for that, because they didn't give it to us for free, we had to pay for it by selling off assets like farmland, residential real estate, and debt. So this country has taken on enormous amounts of debt to pay for all of this. It's time to pay the piper.
It's puzzling, Spencer, as to how nobody paid attention to this and we just kind of let this trade deficit grow over time, especially when we look at countries like China. Now, I know this goes back a couple of decades or more, back to the most favored nation status, that big debate over China, where there was the argument being made that, well, we're going to change the world by doing business with them. We're going to change China. But what's happened, we've just transferred a lot of jobs to China. We've not changed China. They're still the repressive, tyrannical government that they were before.
Yeah, there's a lot of idealism that went into all of this. If you look at the sort of the roots of international free trade, again, we're saying free trade. It's not actually free trade. But if you look at the roots of this, this is rooted in an internationalist agenda that dates back at least until the formation of the European Union, and likely before that. So if you look back at the founding documents of the European Union, you have its architects like Robert Schuman saying that what they'd like to do is make warfare materially impossible by integrating all of the economies in Europe, right? So if Germany relies on French steel and France relies on German coal, it would be impossible for those two countries to wage war. So that sort of agenda was transferred into the academy and into America's elites, and it sort of permeated the culture after that point.
So kind of like
I think it's a very strong
a global application of what Europe was doing.
That's exactly correct. So it was sort of tested in Europe, and then it was brought over to America, and that started again in the 1970s. And ever since then, we've been offshoring our critical industries to countries like China.
And I think the wake-up call, at least a portion of it, came with COVID, when we saw what China did and their control of the personal protective equipment and how we were reliant on them for pharmaceuticals and other material.
Yeah, I think it's unbelievable. I mean, we think about back to World War I and World War II. Those wars were won on the backs of American industry. At the time, we made all of the firearms, the syringes, all of the medical equipment. At the conclusion of World War II, America produced 50% of everything that was made on Earth. America was the world's factory. And today, that couldn't be further from the truth. America barely makes anything. I mean, if you go to the store, try to find a fork that's made in America.
You can't.
You're not going to be able to find it.
It is difficult because I refuse to buy things made in China because of their repression of religious minorities and their horrible human rights record. And it is difficult to find products not made in China. So let's talk, everybody's, how's it going to affect me? All right, that's the bottom line. You've laid out a perfect illustration of, from a national perspective, it's a national security issue, all of these other issues, jobs, but how's it going to affect the average family? We just had about a minute left, and we'll be going to another segment, but how's this going to affect our viewers and listeners?
Well, I think everybody who's watching this stands to benefit enormously from this tariff package. And the reason for that is because what these tariffs are going to do is they're realigning the global trade networks away from the capital interests that benefit from offshoring and in favor of the American workers. So what this is going to do is this is going to reshore factories to our country and all of the jobs that come with them. And when we have, and I did the math on this, and there's an article that I'm publishing tomorrow, but if you look at the sort of potential for reshoring factories as it's reflected in the trade deficit, and then if you add on top of that the fact that these reciprocal tariffs are going to open up new markets for American products, we're probably looking at a potential of about 10 to 15 million brand new jobs. And these are going to be jobs that are concentrated in lucrative industries, jobs with health benefits, the sort of jobs that we can support families on, just like we used to.
Right. Not just shepherding Chinese imported products in dollar stores. Spencer, thanks for sticking around. All right, a few questions I want to get to in this segment. So, will this spark a trade war? These tariffs, or are we going to see a tit for tat?
Well, there's really two options for foreign nations to respond to these tariffs. They could respond by raising tariffs of their own, but you have to remember the tariffs that President Trump has instituted are only half of the average rate anyways. So I don't think that's going to be a very productive way of handling things. The other and probably more likely option is that these countries are simply going to do the math. They're going to realize that America is the biggest consumer market on planet Earth, and their economies need us far more than we need them. And as a result, I think a lot of countries are going to come to the table and they're going to say, look, we want access to your market and we're ready to play ball. So what I expect is that a lot of countries are going to open up their markets to American goods, and that's going to help create millions and millions of new jobs by opening up billions of potential consumers for our products. So I think that's the most likely outcome.
I'm not an expert on this, but I would agree with you from a standpoint. I think it was a very smart move to only go halfway and not meet them at a reciprocal level, because you're right. Why would they want to raise it? Because that's only going to allow President Trump to possibly raise the tariffs here higher. So let's talk about, I asked this of Congressman Stutzman earlier, but so I agree. This is going to spur manufacturing growth in the United States, going to bring a lot of that back, as you've talked about in your book, back onto American shores. But is there a lag time that in the meantime, the American economy is going to be, maybe the consumer is going to be pinched a bit? There's a startup for manufacturing. First, you've got a lot of these plants aren't there anymore. You got to build the plants, but you also have to train the workers. So is there a lag time before we see the impact of this?
Yeah, again, I think it's important to put this in context. This whole process of offshoring and the race to the bottom, it started in 1974. We've been at this for over 50 years. So to think that any president, no matter how competent they are, is going to be able to solve this overnight in the space of a few months is crazy talk. It took us half a century to get here. It's going to take some time to adjust. And yeah, so I think there's going to be some short-term pain. But it's also important to remember, the economy is an organic system, okay? It's not like a mechanical system like a washing machine where, input in and you get the output you're expecting. Organic systems like the human body or like society or the economy respond to stressors in different ways. And typically a stressor creates a positive strengthening response. So I think we're going to see some short-term pain. And that's okay because we're going to emerge on the other end stronger than ever before.
And might this spur a new era of entrepreneurs that meet those needs that are created through this process?
Yeah, I think that's entirely likely. I mean, you have to remember, right now, American companies and small businesses are competing directly with governments, right? I mean, foreign companies that are competing in America are not just foreign companies. They're arms of the Chinese government. They're backed by, the German banks. So it's really what we're dealing with is asymmetrical competition, where American free enterprise is competing directly with foreign governments for market share. So it's not free, not free whatsoever. So I think there's a very good chance that American entrepreneurs are going to rise to the occasion. Right now, they're being pushed out of the market by the government. Tariffs are going to level the playing field, and we'll rise to the occasion, as we always do.
And I think, as I see it, in this lag time for the big companies to set up these big manufacturing, just as we've seen a lot of small businesses step into kind of niche markets, specialty markets, I think you could see a lot of entrepreneurs that would step into to that area. Do you see this as having an impact on our GDP growth?
Yeah, I think absolutely. The reality is that the trade deficit is the reflection of America's displaced economic production. So reducing the trade deficit by definition is going to increase the GDP. It's actually one side, it's both sides of the equation. You can't shrink the deficit without increasing GDP. So, I mean, that's simply going to happen. But one point that I'd really like to stress before the end of our segment, because I know we're running out of time, is that these tariffs, it's about so much more than economics. This is a statement to the world, and it's a statement to the American people that America is no longer going to be worshiping the golden calf of free trade. America has value beyond cheap goods and the pursuit of luxury and reckless consumption. Tariffs are going to do amazing things to reshore our industrial base so that we can defend this country. They're going to provide jobs to ordinary people who didn't go to college that they can support and build families on. And it's going to bring wealth into all of these dilapidated communities. I mean, you drive through small towns and it's painful to see the effects of offshoring and job loss. But those factories come back, the communities come back to life. It's going to be great for our society and great for our people.
Spencer, I theoretically agree with you. I hope you're right. I think there's a deeper issue when you talk about cheap products and consumerism. There's a spiritual component here as well that has to be addressed from my perspective, because we've lost our way, and it's all about consuming and not giving and creating. Spencer, great conversation. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks so much. God bless.